All right. First up, we have a presentation from Matthew Santa Croce. He's interim deputy director of Rhode Island Department of Business Regulation, and this is in regards to the cannabis legislation, I believe. It's a PowerPoint.
Yes.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. If you could just state your name for the record.
Sure. Matthew Santa Cruz.
Santa Cruz.
Pretty close.
Almost.
So great. Thank you all for the invitation. And Councilor Davis, thank you. We spoke on the phone a few weeks ago. The request, I think, as I understood it, and I should say I'm joined by two of my colleagues from the Department of Business Regulation as well, Pam Toro and Erica Forelli, was to kind of come down and just give a quick overview of what legalization will mean for the state of Rhode Island generally, and then to the extent that there are particular considerations for cities and towns, including Hopkinton, leading up to the November ballot question, what kinds of things folks might want to have on their minds. And then after I get through my song and dance, I'm going to leave as much time as you'd like for questions and answers, of which I'm sure there'll be several.
Are we all set, Ryan?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know I was.
Oh, no, I just checking. I just want to make sure the audio, there wasn't a problem with the audio. So.
Oh, it's up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just on the agenda slide. Yep.
I don't know why it's not showing.
Full screen, maybe.
Not moving.
The mouse is frozen.
This is changing.
Not
It's
moving.
not. No, it's
Oh.
moving on here, but it's not changing up there. I'll take it.
No worries. Should I keep going or wait for this to get figured out?
No, I mean, you can speak as much as you want and they'll pop it up. That's fine. I mean, you present to the council. So
Okay, great. All right. So just on the agenda slide, I thought I'd start off with just a quick lay of the land on kind of the current situation with medical marijuana. Then I'll dive into kind of the key provisions of the Rhode Island Cannabis Act, which is the legalization provisions. And then kind of a few things that cities and towns ought to have on their mind. So to move it to the sort of medical marijuana, slide 2, medical marijuana in Rhode Island. We have had medical marijuana in varying forms in Rhode Island since 2007. We've had licensed dispensary and cultivation operations in Rhode Island since about 2009. And at present, we have just under 17,000 registered patient card holders in Rhode Island, by which I mean individuals who are qualified by a medical professional to purchase at retail.
Our internet is bouncing. That's the problem, of course.
Typically, there's a number of qualifying conditions, things like chronic pain, terminal cancer, that sort of thing. And that number has been shrinking somewhat over the past couple of years. We have 67 licensed cultivators in Rhode Island right now. These are licensed industrial commercial growers that are all happening indoors, including 2 in this town. That are cultivating at anywhere between 2,500 and 10,000 square feet of growing space right now. And again, there's 67 of them all in the state. And then we have 5 licensed retailers. We just licensed the 5th retailer today, as it happens, selling marijuana at retail again to those qualifying patients. Altogether, there's a market of about $87 million on the medical side alone right now, which has been, contracting slightly since 2020, which was kind of its peak for reasons that I'm sure you can surmise, but is probably going to expand as things move forward with legalization. So the slide with the map on it is just meant to show you kind of how geographically this breaks down across the state. For regulatory purposes right now, under the medical marijuana program rules and regulations, we divide the state up into 6 zones that are kind of the bold blue lines, ranging from northern Rhode Island Zone 1 to Zone 6, which is kind of the East Bay and includes Block Island. This was basically meant to ensure that retail locations are distributed somewhat uniformly across the state relative to where population centers are, such that most individuals in Rhode Island, if not all individuals in Rhode Island, are within 15 or 20 minutes of a retailer. The 3 gold stars here, one in Providence, one in Warwick, and one in Portsmouth, are the 3 original compassion centers that were licensed years and years ago. The legislation that was passed in 2019 expanded the number of licensed compassion centers, which are medical retailers in the state, from 3 to 9. So adding an additional 6. The 2 red stars.
You have to move again.
Okay.
One more. There we go.
The 2 red stars are newly licensed compassion centers. That is to say, compassion center is licensed this year, one in South Kingston and one in Central Falls. And then the 4 sort of red stars with not filled in are compassion center licenses that have been approved, but have not yet actually met the final prerequisites for licensure. And there'll be one in Warwick, one in Pawtucket, one in Woonsocket, and then one in Foster. So again, what you'll have by the time this process is all wrapped up is 9 total compassion centers spread across those 6 zones. And please feel free to interrupt me with any questions as I'm going along here. So the next slide, slide 4, kind of gets into some of the key provisions of the Rhode Island Cannabis Act, which was the adult use legalization legislation that passed this year. It was like a 100-page bill, so this is obviously not all of it, but I think it's the key and most important ones. First, and this is already the case, this became effective on May 26th when the legislation was signed by the governor. Possession for personal use is legal right now in the state of Rhode Island, and that means 1 ounce of a cannabis product or its equivalent on your person, sort of out and about, or 10 ounces allowed sort of in your possession in your residence. Which also became illegal on May 26th was the sort of personal recreational home grow cannabis plants of 3 plants per person. And again, that's already the case in Rhode Island today. So on the retail side, it provides for total 33 retail outlets for recreational retail consumption. It starts off with the 9 existing compassion centers that were on the previous slide. Those are going to transition very quickly, starting on December 1st, into the first 9 adult use retailers that we'll have in the state of Rhode Island. So when people think about adult use sales starting on December 1st, it's going to be at those 9 existing licensed medical retailers. The theory there is a very good one, which is that they're already selling marijuana compliantly under the medical program. They know how to do it securely and safely. In order to do this quickly, we're going to have them transition and be the first 9 stores. The remaining 24 stores will be distributed across those 6 zones according to rules and regulations that will be promulgated by the yet to be formed Cannabis Control Commission. That'll likely happen sometime in 2023, if not early 2024. There are a number of provisions in the Act having to do with social equity and providing an access to the market for a diverse group of stakeholders and business owners. There are retail license set-asides for certain groups of individuals and certain kinds of business owners. Substantial investment of new tax revenue and things having to do with cannabis and not having to do with cannabis. Forgiving license fees, technical assistance, training, that sort of thing, to give an on-ramp into the industry for folks who might not otherwise have it. And then some provisions relating to the expungement of past low-level marijuana convictions.
Sir, could you, with everybody likes to abbreviate stuff for our benefit and maybe the people watching at home in our audience, could you give me a little idea of what MJ convictions means?
Sorry about that. Marijuana. That was just so it could fit in the box. That's our shorthand for marijuana. So
this way everybody kind of
it.
understands
Great
Thank
question.
you.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Well, so just so people know too, that's not, so most of these expungements will be for crimes that kind of fit into what the law is now. So if you're trafficking 100 pounds of marijuana and you're caught, you're not going to get expunged. That's
Exactly.
not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's basically meant to say if something was a criminal conviction in the past, that would be legal now. It's logical to kind of wipe that off your record.
Right.
And then just on the tax side, the 20% effective rate that will be in effect at retail is pretty much in line with what the case is in Massachusetts. It was meant to make sure that our market could compete with theirs, given that they're so closely linked. And there's an important provision for local governments with is that there's a 3% dedicated revenue share to the municipalities where the transactions are occurring at retail, which is an important consideration as you kind of go into this ballot referendum. Yep.
I have a question. 31 out of 39 of the cities are putting this question on the ballot. So if the people in those 31 cities decide that they do not want marijuana sold in their city, how will that affect the distribution of the 24 more retailers?
It's a great question. I think there's two things to say about that. First is that depending on how that broke down, if that was to be something at or near 31 out of those 39, I think it's pretty likely that the regulations governing the distribution of those stores would have to be flexible enough to account for that. Secondly, and probably more importantly, I think that just based on what we know about public opinion on this front, I think it's pretty unlikely that more than a handful of those actually vote to opt out. I think that it's a very important step in the process for local electors to have an opportunity to voice an opinion on whether or not it's right for their community. I think at the end of the day, though, given where public opinion is on this issue, and more importantly, actually just given the economics of the revenue situation that's built into the legislation, folks will probably end up coming down in favor of it more often than not.
You know,
I have a question. So on the taxation, the 3%
Yep.
that's dedicated to local governments, is that 3% of the tax on the revenue overall, or just what was sold in that municipality?
It's the latter. So it's going to, for every transaction, pretend you make $100 purchase, $3 that's added onto that by way of tax will flow from the state back to the municipality. It was a retail store in Hopkinton. That $3 would flow back to the town, much like the meals and beverage tax does right now.
And do you know what the 3%, how was that number arrived at?
It was part of the legislative process. Yeah. I think it was something that felt reasonable. It's roughly in line, I think, with the revenue share that exists in Massachusetts.
Okay. Thank you.
A couple of things. This town was recently burned on the solar issue and the tax promises that they were supposed to get. And the legislature can still change the 3%. That's correct.
That is correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
because you see, I think a lot of times people are told or made promises to that are never delivered.
Yep.
We just got burned on the solar thing that people thought there was going to be an economic benefit. My question to you is, I'm 69. I grew up when marijuana use was, frowned upon, and I think that people shouldn't have criminal things. But how much, revenue do you think a small town like Hopkinton, Richmond, or Exeter, any of these smaller towns, could really reasonably expect to generate? Because I see a situation where, just like gambling, where everybody got in the act, so you could probably get this anywhere. So basically, it might not be the plus that people might think it is.
It's a great question. I'll say this. I think that sorry, go ahead.
I think I could probably answer his question a little bit better, or maybe you could help. Is there anything, I think, willing to look at the chart, is there anything close to Hopkinton that's already has a cannabis store in it that we compare? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Something
well,
we
I
can
mean,
compare
it's
to?
just like gambling. There were so many people that got into it. The pool, they basically competed against each other. And I don't see anything in nearby Connecticut, but I don't know what Connecticut, North Stonington, some of these, because we're a border town.
Yep.
But I see the scenario where everybody could be doing this. And I assume, what is Westerly doing, do you know?
Westerly does not obviously have any medical retail right now. I don't know off the top of my head if they have a referendum or not. I would imagine that they're going through the same exact discussion that you guys are right now. I'll say this, regardless of whether or not this is a small town, it's geographically located very advantageously, right off the
Because of
highway,
95, yes.
right next to Connecticut. Rhode Island is going to be Connecticut to market in December, even though their bill passed 2 years ago. And you've got obviously a large tourist population in Westerly and parts in that direction. So I think that, there's a decent opportunity there, but again, it's whether or not a retail focused entrepreneur decides to set up shop here based on the specific parameters of the town.
Does the state, one final question, does the state set up a limit for marijuana shops in each city and town, or is that strictly a town option?
That's part of
It does not. So the way it's going to be limited is by way of this map right here. So there are going to be 4 new retail outlets in each zone. Beyond that, though, it doesn't have any interaction with town borders. It's purely based on the existing medical marijuana zones. So you could theoretically have 2 in Westerly, 2 in Hopkinton. You could have all 4 set up in Charleston. It kind of is up to the business owners and the specific situation on the towns.
Even if the voters wanted to have one in their town, if there's 4 in that zone elsewhere in other towns, that town can get the 5th one. As I understand that correctly?
the zone.
Correct. It is a limited license environment at this point in time. So there will be a cap, at least at the outset, on the number of licenses, which is not the case in Massachusetts.
Yeah, the other question is, I know Brian wants to ask a question. If a town turns this down in November, do they have a shot? What's the procedure if the town in the future wanted to do it?
Great question. So, and this is in I think the last slide. If the town votes this November against it, which is to say no licenses in this town, they do have another shot at it, but they need to get the assembly to authorize that by way of a joint resolution.
wow.
So you need to go to your delegation.
And a one-year council.
Yeah, exactly.
I think,
I'm going to ask any more questions.
I think what my counselor is asking is he doesn't, if you go out to, I recently went out to Western Massachusetts, out towards the Berkshires, and it seemed like every corner, there was some kids spinning a sign, going here. There's like one on every corner. I think what he was kind of questioning is we open the door, one gets in, will there be another 3 or 4 on the corner? That's what he's asking. Right?
Yeah, and the answer to that is no. It's going to be pretty tightly regulated, at least in the first couple of years.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question.
Sure, please.
I think that Councilor Davis had wanted the DVR to come and make a presentation because I think I share her concern that the ballot question does not tell the voter that there are financial implications to their vote. And I'm very concerned about that because the person who goes into the voting booth and doesn't know anything except what is written on that ballot, the only thing they see is marijuana stores, yes or no. That's it. They are not provided with anything that tells them if I vote no, the town might lose tax money or the opportunity for tax money. So I want to know if there's anything that the state is going to do between now and November to make people more aware of that. Because I was really disappointed to see the way that question was worded that's going to appear on the ballot.
It's a great point. So, I either have the misfortune or fortune of being part of the executive branch. Depending on how you look at it, the folks who crafted that language were part of the other branch of government.
Well, I know that
Yeah.
wasn't your decision, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that you're planning to do to help make people more aware of the consequences of their decision when they vote.
We're having
Because the
conversations.
executive branch did sign it, right? Also, I mean, the
100%.
governor signed it, so I'm sure he's for it. So I think that's kind of along the lines. Is there anything you could?
I really don't. I mean, I would hate to see, a week after the election, everybody has, buyer's remorse because they realize that they voted against something without knowing the full impact of their decision.
So at the end of the day, our job at the Department of Business Regulation is to regulate these businesses. Me personally, are very, very clear and careful, even during the legislative process, not to take a advocacy position one way or the other in favor of legalization or not. It's not our job. We all have our personal views on it. We all have our personal experiences with it. What we get paid to do is to effectively regulate businesses transparently and in accordance with the law and the regulations. And what you're talking about, I think, starts to look like something more like an advocacy effort. At the end of the day, I think that there's a critical role for local electors to play in this process, and the legislation reflects that. So, we're going around and having some conversations like this, purely informational, and trying to let folks know what is and is not in the bill and what's going to be happening between now and December 1st. But, at the end of the day, we're not planning on getting deeply involved in the political process on that front.
And I just, for the record, as as the solicitor of the town and not an elected official, I have no preference as to what decision is made or what, but I don't like to see that it looks like people going to vote might not have all the information they need.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
So would you be able to explain what the Cannabis Control Commission will do? Is that something you can give information on? Like,
Sure.
What's their role and what their powers are?
So this might actually be a good opportunity to move to the next slide, the timeline slide, because
Excellent. All right. I didn't see that.
Yeah. So just to kind of give you, because it's part of the sort of timeline question here, and the legislation kind of contemplates this two-phase implementation approach. Phase one is already underway, and that's kind of running between June of 2022 and the end of this calendar year. So the first two dots on this timeline. The legislation gives the Department of Business Regulation, the existing regulators, very clear and sort of unfettered authority to get our existing cultivators and retailers licensed to begin what we call hybrid cultivation and hybrid sales by December 1st, which basically means keep doing everything you're doing under the medical market. You now get to grow and then sell for just a different set of people, but we're not going to reopen the regulations. It's not going to look like Massachusetts style packaging and labeling, advertising, that sort of thing. Really, really, really tightly focused on opening doors to new customers at the same places, selling the same product on December 1st. And by the way, it's basically the same product that you would be able to buy in adult use in Massachusetts anywhere. It might be packaged somewhat differently, but by and large, medical marijuana and adult use marijuana are like perfect substitutes. Once we get through that first kind of 6-month effort through the end of this year, the Cannabis Control Commission is going to start to be a factor. And what the legislation provides is that there's this new 3-member gubernatorially appointed oversight and essentially executive branch agency that will be made up of a chairperson and 2 sort of subsidiary members, again, appointed by the governor, subject to advising and on the Senate, that will begin the work of promulgating full adult use rules and regulations. It's a lengthy and very substantial exercise that's taken in other states 1.5 years, roughly on average. Once they get through the full rules and regulations for adult use, they then absorb all of the existing regulatory responsibility of DBR, the Department of Health, and some other agencies in state government into sort of a streamlined and consolidated regulatory structure that'll feature a sort of new version of our existing office at DBR that will support it basically as a staff and implementation office. My job will turn into an executive director job that will be sort of the lead staff person for this new agency. And then again, you'll have the sort of political appointees over top conducting business, I think importantly, in a public, as a public body, which is not the case right now under the existing rules and regulations. So that's probably a 1.5 year process, I think, start to finish. I would expect appointments. And again, this is just speculation at this point. We don't know anything for sure. Appointments to that commission to happen sometime in the beginning of 2023. Again, the Senate has to, confirm those nominees, and then they need to get to work. So, like I said, it's a heavy lift. And so I would expect sometime by the end of 2023, final rules and regulations to be promulgated. And based on those rules and regulations, probably early 2024 applications for new retail stores. And then probably mid to late 2024, you'll see new retail stores start to pop up in Rhode Island beyond the existing 9. That's kind of our best guess at this point on the timing of this thing.
Is that something that the Department of Business Regulation would advise on? More retail locations and stuff like that? I mean,
Yeah,
not-
so-
not promote, but just kind of say there's a market for more or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, well, and just to be clear about that, the number of new retail stores is set in the statute, so that's not going to change.
Well, it can always change because they can always, the legislature can change that.
Exactly. If we get whatever 5 years down the road and it turns out that there's lines out the door, no one can keep product on the shelves, and you've got people still going to Connecticut or Massachusetts or the guy down the street, then it might be the case that more retail stores are advisable, but that's going to be based on market conditions at the time. Yep.
You said Hopkinton has 2 cultivators.
Yes.
Are those cultivators going to become retailers or not?
No.
No.
No. So they will continue to strictly produce and
Grow.
manufacture. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Does the law allow you to be a cultivator and a seller at the same time?
It's a very complicated question with a complicated. It's a simple question with a complicated answer. The existing law, the medical law, does permit that, and as it happens, we have 5 of the total 9 will be what we call vertically integrated, which means they basically control the product from seed to sale, and then the remainder of the 9 are retail only. So in the first phase of this, it's kind of going to be split half and half. The new 24 will all be strictly retail. So the new ones will not be vertically integrated. Vertical integration has not really been good for Rhode Island's market for like the reasons you can imagine. There's not a whole lot of reason to be price sensitive. There's not a lot of diversity in the market in terms of product or availability, that sort of thing. So the legislation really wanted to have a larger number of retail only storefronts. It's also easier to find a place to do business, to be honest, if you're just opening up a storefront. And we already have, like I said, 67 cultivators who are producing more than enough to supply the market.
And there's a cap, right? I mean, 2 years or something like that before
For cultivation. Yeah.
cultivation.
Yep. So that's kind of the timeline of what we're looking at here. Again, our real focus right now is getting to December 1st, and we will do that. We're going to have an application for retail conversion in the next couple of weeks. And so that's going to be the big red letter date. So to go to slide 6, just kind of a couple of slides on considerations for your town. As you already know, and we've talked about, the referendum option is very straightforward. That does not apply to the issuance of hybrid retail licenses. So if you already had a retailer doing business in your town as a medical retailer, the referendum wouldn't have any impact on its ability to do hybrid sales. Again, not a problem in Hopkinton. Any existing cultivator or lab, again, can continue doing business regardless of the results. I meant to delete out the thing in parentheses. There are 2 in Hopkinton. That's an old draft. I apologize for that. And again, towns voting to reject the issuance of new licenses will not be able to take advantage of the 3% revenue share that we discussed a few minutes ago. And again, like I said, it functions basically as a local option sales tax that passes through the state revenue department.
So when they go to the retailer and they're buying their marijuana, there's a tax on it.
Yep.
It's part of the price that they have to pay, and it's a 20% tax, of which 3% is going to come back to the town.
Yep. So there's the 7% state sales tax. There's a 10% additional marijuana surtax, essentially, and then the 3% on top of that. So it'll show up as 3 different taxes on the receipt in all likelihood.
Go ahead.
Matt, real quick. Let's just say, let's look into the crystal ball here. Let's say it's November 8th, town approves it. You're still talking a year, 15 months before somebody says, hey, I want to go ahead and grow in Hopkinton. That person would have to apply for the license. You're talking, I guess what I'm trying to say is this isn't something that's going to happen overnight if it gets approved.
I think you're right. Just by way of reference, Massachusetts passed their essentially their legalization bill, which was a referendum, but their legalization law passed in 2016, and the first store opened in Massachusetts in late 2018. So it was more than 2 years later.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to take that long here because we're more ready for it than they were. But I wouldn't think that you would even have an application available until Christmas 2023, if
Wow.
at the earliest, and that's an application.
Okay, thank you.
Would,
Go ahead.
would,
Go, Sharon.
would our building and zoning have to approve? Did they have to go through our local building and zoning process to open a retail store?
Yes. So that's one of the,
Which
and
we've already put into the works.
Yeah. So much like any other business, the town would have time, place, manner sort of things
Mhm.
over the operations, and also make sure it's zoned in appropriate parts of town. So absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to clarify, you said there's going to be 4 per zone.
Yes.
Is that in addition to the existing, you said the medical retailers going to get converted first?
Yes.
So it's in addition, or,
That,
because I know there's one in South Kingston.
Yep.
In our zone.
Yep.
So it'd be 4 more or 3 more?
4 more. Yep. 4 more. Yep.
Figure that out.
Yep.
Now, how is that going to, is it the 4 first people that get their applications out, or is there going to be like another lottery? And then they can decide where they want to put their.
That's a big open question. And that's ultimately one of the big decisions that's going to be left to the commission to decide. Our lottery that we did for the passion centers was pursuant to the rules and regulations that were promulgated in 2019. 19.
Right.
So the commission will promulgate rules and regulations. They'll be very, very specific about how those new licenses will be awarded. So it could be
And
a
I'm
lot
sure
of.
once they're, awarded, these are businessmen. They're going to decide where the best potential, and I'm sure they're going to pursue towns that
Yep.
have the best, access.
Right.
Absolutely.
95 being.
Yep.
So.
So just my last slide with words on it is slide 7. Like I said, again, a couple of minutes ago, towns that vote to reject the question can resubmit it annually, but again, they need a joint resolution of the assembly. And then there's like a multitude of levers that exist in the law that allow towns to govern things like time, place, and manner, sort of licensed cultivation activities that might be a public nuisance, can't have it stink all the time, public signage restrictions, and then this is an interesting one. A few other towns have already kind of run into this, particularly during beach season, which was where and when you can smoke or vape in public places. Most towns have basically mirrored their like cigarette use laws around public places, but it's certainly been an interesting challenge, I think, for a few of them. And I think with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have. The last slide has our contact information on it, and happy to.
Maddie,
Any
I got a
questions?
question for you. We realize this is kind of like, this is kind of like baby steps,
Yep.
for us going into this. But my question to you is, how often does the state, I guess, audit, take a look at things? I mean, is there something in the rule book? Hey, every couple months we'll go look at the one over here. Hey, we'll go look at this. Make sure everything's on the up and up.
Absolutely. So every single licensed business in Rhode Island right now gets at least one inspection every year during their annual renewal process, and almost every single one of them gets a couple more on top of that are either announced or unannounced, just to ensure compliance with things like, are your plants tagged properly? Do your security cameras work? Are the people who are working here the people who we have approved to work here? That sort of thing. The legislation and the assembly was additionally very generous, and we're very appreciative of that in their budget decisions around this. They gave our office a pretty substantial new allocation of staff resources to ramp up for this. And so we're in the process right now of hiring almost a half a dozen new inspectors to really increase our reach across the state, so that we've got maybe not 2 visits a year, but 1 visit a month, at least, for each one of these businesses, because compliance is key.
Now, do you also make sure they're selling what they're advertising? Like if they're saying it's 20% THC.
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah, so we've worked very hard over the course of the past 2 years to phase in, and Erica has been really the brains and the muscle behind all of this. What I think is a best in the region enforced testing regime, such that consumers, when they show up, even right now in the medical program, to the store, and you get something off the shelf that says 25% THC, you know that it A is that, and B does not have things in it like yeast, mold, human fecal matter, lead, mercury, cadmium, pesticides, that sort of thing, which was not the case 3 or 4 years ago. So we have a very, I think, a really, really well-run testing program in place.
One final thing. If they can have 3 plants at home, who's checking?
I mean, you know,
I volunteer.
The neighbors.
yeah. To the extent that there's a suspicion of growing above and beyond that actually is criminal activity at that
But your
point. That's not.
Your electric bill is like
Yeah.
$2,000. Next door is 500.
Yeah, and you know, it's pretty hard to disguise a large-scale grow operation in a residential neighborhood, and that's where local law enforcement and state law enforcement get involved. We don't have much to say about that if it's not happening at a licensed premises. It's a good question, though.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that I push for in the council, well, most of the people in the council agree, is that in manufacturing and commercial zones, it won't be automatically permitted. It would have to be a special use permit, but the zoning board of review will be able to make a decision, and it won't be just definite. And most of us on the council believe that was the way to go. Regardless of what we might choose to do in the future, this is new. I'm 69, and marijuana or cannabis was verboten years ago, and here I am, a man of 69, seeing the whole attitude toward cannabis. Marijuana is so dramatically different than when I was younger. So it's just a fascinating thing.
It certainly is moving very quickly.
Excellent.
Well, thank you guys so much for the
Thank you.
invitation,
Thank you
and
so much.
happy to come back anytime. And this is how you get a hold of us. Happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
for being here.
Thank you.
Inspector Towley will stop by. Towley from South Park.